When I first heard about the OM System OM1ii upgrade, I was quite skeptical. I thought it seemed like a big jump in price for very few upgrades, on paper at least. But sometimes that isn't the whole story. Sometimes you have to get out and about with the camera and see what's new for yourself. So I've been in the Faroe Islands for just over a week now, and I've been shooting with the OM1ii every day, and I've got some thoughts and some feelings and perhaps some updated opinions. Just a quick piece of housekeeping before we jump straight in. OM System have sent me this for a loan for this trip. It is going back. They've sent me some lenses as well. They don't have any say in what is in this video, and they haven't seen this before it's gone live. I bought the OM1 last year with my own money, and I've been using it for over a year, so I'm quite familiar with the system. Okay, with that out of the way, seriously, I'm going to jump in now. So what's new in the OM1ii? I keep doing this. Well, a lot of the updates are algorithm based, and I hate that phrase, so bear with me. A lot of the updates are around bird AI and autofocus improvements and subject detection in general. This is notoriously hard to quantify against the OM1, for example, because you can't exactly ask for a bird to go around twice so I can test them together. So what I'm going to do instead is show you some real world examples. I'll go through my burst rates and show you all of my hits and my misses, and give you my overall impressions of what's new and what's being improved. So what else is new? There's now human body detection in the subject detection mode rather than just human face detection. And this makes the AF much more sticky, particularly for video. Sometimes if you shoot in video, it's really good at locking onto you, but if you turn your head to one side, it can get a little bit bored and wander. Now with human body detection, it's much more rock solid. Also in terms of like landscape shots where you want a human subject smaller in the frame, it now detects that as a subject rather than just having to seek out the faces. One of the biggest upgrades for me that's impacted me the most is the simplicity now of the autofocus modes. Because the OM1, the original OM1, in my opinion, is just so blooming convoluted. Let me give you a rundown of the options. I've got a list. So the original OM1 had continuous autofocus, then continuous autofocus plus tracking. Then the continuous autofocus could be used with various face detection modes. I think there were 4 different face detection modes. And then the continuous autofocus could be used with the 5 different subject tracking modes as well, like bird or person. But then, where it got even more confusing was if you had the continuous autofocus plus tracking and subject detection, that worked in a slightly different way again. So in my opinion, coming from more simple cameras, it was just a minefield knowing which was the right thing to use in which situation. Oftentimes on the OM1, and I've read on forums that other people are the same, I've turned off tracking altogether and just gone with continuous autofocus and found that quite reliable. I'm very, very happy to say with the OM1ii that all of that convolutedness is just gone. With the OM1ii, it's so simple I don't even need my list. First of all, we've got continuous autofocus, super simple to understand. Then we have continuous autofocus plus the 6 subjects, so bird, car, person, whatever. And then if your subject isn't detected, you can have continuous autofocus plus generic tracking. So that uses color, contrast, movement, and it makes its own mind up as to what the subject is, and it works very well. So it's as simple as that. If you have a specific subject in the frame that the camera is calibrated to find, use that mode. If not, use tracking mode. If you want a more generic experience, just use continuous autofocus. I am zen. I am happy. Another computational upgrade for the OM1ii is we have live graduated ND filters now, which means you can have a digital neutral density filter, a graduated one, so great for landscapes, in camera, and use it even handheld as well. So having access to a graduated filter in camera is really cool. And it works really intuitively as well. You've just sort of got it on the touch screen and you can swipe it down and put it wherever you want, and even put it on an angle as well. And still in place, but with a few more intensity options, we still have live ND just like the original OM1. This gives you a sort of virtual neutral density filter. So if you want to do sort of a 1 second or 2 second handheld exposure, or put it on a tripod, but you know, I don't like tripods, You can, and that means you can get that blurry water effect very easily in camera without whipping out your filter. This was super handy yesterday, in fact, because the weather was atrocious and we were at a waterfall, a beautiful waterfall, and the idea of faffing around with filters, I would 100% have got raindrops everywhere. It would have been a nightmare. But using Live ND in camera made the whole thing super quick and super simple, and I was back in the car before I knew it. So let's quickly talk about the form factor of the OM1 series of cameras. There is absolutely nothing new physically, except we now have OM System on the front instead of Olympus, and the front dial here is just a little bit more rubbery and a little bit more tactile to use. Aside from that, if you've used an OM1 before, the OM1 Mark II will feel very, very similar. For me, because it is slightly smaller, I really think it hugs my hand very well. I find it the most comfortable, larger Micro Four Thirds camera, particularly compared to the G9 Mark II, which is my usual camera of choice. But you know what they say, it's what's on the inside that counts, and that's where one of the biggest upgrades has happened in the OM1 Mark II. We now have a 200 frame buffer versus the older one, which I believe was 99, and the 200 frame buffer brings it on par with the G9 II. In practice, there are some very big differences with the way those two cameras work, which I will go through in a comparison video. So here are some real-world burst modes with the OM1 Mark II. I found the buffer increase to be a huge benefit, and just like the original OM1, the write speed is super duper fast, and you can just basically use it over and over again without waiting too long for the camera to catch up. I don't think it's a secret that photographing puffins, particularly mid-air, is really quite tricky. But the OM1 Mark II and this beast of a lens make it as easy as it possibly can be, but it's still not easy. I've had some good success with the mechanical burst mode. That's really handy if I want to swap between just doing portraiture and burst modes. I can just leave that running. And I've really enjoyed SH2, which gives me, I believe, 50 frames a second with this combo. And then also the Pro Capture SH2, so that's continuous autofocus and up to 50 frames a second. I set out today hoping to get some portraiture and some video and some birds in flight, and I haven't had a proper pixel peep, but so far I think I'm really happy with what I've got. So the reason that the OM1 line of cameras is genius for the burst modes, and it's the same in the OM1 Mark II of course, is the camera starts writing to SD cards as you're shooting your burst mode. So by the time you've finished your burst mode, there's enough space in the buffer to get the next one underway if you need to. In practice, this means that you can shoot several in a row and not miss a shot. I was shooting lots for the puffins because they are little sneaky animals. Sometimes they look like they're going to fly away and they go, oh no, I'm just cleaning my wings, don't worry. And then the burst mode's gone. But luckily with the OM1 Mark II, because it writes so fast and the buffer's so big, it's no big deal. I can just try again when it does actually fly away. One of my favourite more minor updates in the OM1 Mark II is there's been a couple of additions to the Super Control menu. Now, if you don't know, this is the menu that pops up when you press OK, and it gives you quick access to all of your features. You can also see now which subject detection modes you're in, and you can automatically go to birds, trains, aeroplanes, animals, etc. And in the past, on the original OM1, that sort of thing was still buried in the menu. And it's something that sometimes you need quick access to. So I'm very happy that the Super Control menu is updated with all of the newer features, and it just means that you spend less time in the menus. On the subject of menus, just like with the original OM1, I love the direction that OM System have gone with their menu system. If you've been on my channel before, you'll know that I do not gel well with older Olympus style cameras. I find the menus very deep, very complex, and they just don't stick in my head. I don't know, maybe my brain's too small. I'm very happy to say that the OM1 and the OM Mark II have these beautiful, easy to navigate, colourful, very, very intuitive menus. So yay. My biggest issue with Olympus is now gone. Bird AI. Let me wax lyrical a little bit more about this because it's such a significant upgrade. As I say, with the original OM1, I found the subject detection to be decent. It's certainly better than 99% of other cameras out there. But when I moved to the G9 II, I think the subject detection on the G9 II did have the edge, particularly for birds. And this makes sense because the G9 II was the newer camera. Now the OM1 Mark II is the newer camera. It came out in February versus September 2023 for the G9 II, so it's got a good 6-7 months on the G9 II. And I have to say, this updated AF and subject detection puts it on par with the G9 II, or perhaps even a little bit better, particularly for birds and fast-moving subjects. I tend to be a little bit of a control freak when it comes to my AF, and I like to have single-point autofocus so I can point the dot on the screen and tell the camera where to go. The OM1 Mark II is the first camera that I've used where I just leave it on all. I'm just like, let the camera figure it out. It gets it 100% of the time. If there's something photograph worthy in the scene, it will lock on and do the job for me. It's just ridiculous how sticky bird AF is. Look at these burst modes and how there's just no missed shots. Even when I'm shooting at 400mm or even 600mm with the really big lens that I've got, I'm shooting this handheld, I'm swaying about in the wind, the bird is almost going out of frame because I've composed it wrong because I'm trying to track it across the sky. And the camera's just like, yeah, no problem. There it is. I've got this. I'll wait for you to sort of fix yourself. And then the composition gets better and the shots continue. At no point does it lose the bird. And before anyone says, some of these are tracking sideways, which is relatively easy, but some of them are tracking over my head and towards me, and it still is sticky as heck. For bird photography, it is the best camera I've ever used for AF. The G9 II is blooming brilliant, don't get me wrong. It's very, very reliable, very good, and a huge update from the original OM1, but the OM1 Mark II with this update is very impressive indeed. Hat continuity. I came down here to get out of the wind and it's just changed direction and it just kept going in my face, so hat time. So I love how the OM1 Mark II works with multiple birds or multiple subjects in the frame. You have a little box over each of them and it's saying, hey, I've recognized this, but it will focus on just one of them. You can use the joystick by your eye and don't have to take your eye off the eyepiece to be like, move right one, move up one, go to this one, and you can still have full control over the composition whilst the camera is keeping track of all the different subjects in the scene. So regarding autofocus as well, I know I'm at a big advantage because I've got Big White with me, the huge Pro 7,000-pound lens, so of course you would want the AF to be rock solid with that. But I've also been using the OM System 150-400, which is comparatively much cheaper, and with all of these, the AF has been very reliable too. So I do think, while obviously having a more expensive lens will help, all of the benefits of the AF are coming from the updates in the OM1 Mark II as opposed to the lens combination. If you are solely a bird and wildlife photographer, I think the OM1 Mark II is probably the best camera on the market right now for that in particular. It's just laser focused on that and it gives you all the features that you need to complete that particular task perfectly. If that's what you want, you can stop watching now, just go buy it. But let me show you what else is new. There's been an update to the handheld high res mode, which is really always hard to say, too many H's. So with this now, you have the option to turn on 14-bit RAW files. And OM System are so happy about this feature that when you take this camera out of the box, it's actually assigned to the record button as opposed to video. This is because 14-bit RAW files will give you more color depth, better dynamic range potentially, and better noise reproduction potentially. I'll have a pixel peep and check. Now, you can use this because of the stabilisation in any shot that's over 1/125th of a second handheld, as long as your subject is still. It wouldn't work if we were shooting waves, for example, because it would move as the image is stitched together. But if you're shooting a still subject, this is a great option. Let's quickly talk about video features. Did I want video upgrades in the OM1 Mark II? Of course I did, but it's just not what this line of cameras is about, really. You have basically exactly the same video features as you do on the original OM1. That being said, it's fine. It gets the job done. You've got 10-bit, which is nice and sharp. I would avoid the 8-bit footage like the plague. It's a crime against anyone with eyes. It is so soft and hideous, and I don't know why it's even in the camera. It makes babies cry. but the 10-bit footage is absolutely stunning. And in terms of sort of travel vlogging, which is what I seem to be doing for my job right now, it has my two non-negotiables, and that is 4K 24p and 4K 60p. As long as I've got that, I'm happy. Do I wish I had 4K 120p? Heck yes, I do. Getting some of the birds in flight with super slow motion would be absolutely lovely, but there are HD slow-mo features if you are that way inclined. It's not the one I would buy if you are a true hybrid shooter. If you want good video and good photos, it's definitely more of a photo-centric camera. Let's talk about stabilisation. The in-camera stabilisation alone is great. OM System reserve the lens stabilisation for the very high-end super zooms. And it makes sense because that's where you need an additional boost in stabilisation. So you don't find it on standard stock lenses in the OM System or Olympus lineup. However, it's not the end of the world because you do have good enough stabilisation in camera. Having used the stabilisation on Big White and also the 150 to 600, it's absolutely ridiculous. Look at these shots. I'm handheld on the longest focal lengths, swaying about in really bad wind. And yes, there is shake, but it is so under control and so well managed because of the stabilisation. I'm shooting at 1,200 millimeters full frame equivalent here, handheld. What a time to be alive. And this also bodes well for when you're tracking birds as well. There's been many a time on this trip where I've been kneeling or standing and I'm watching a bird waiting for it to do something. And having the stabilisation just not sway and just lock onto the subject and just be chill, and I'm not sort of jittering all over the place, it's been really user-friendly, and the stabilisation in the OM1 Mark II is superb. So what do I think about the OM1 Mark II? Well, I think it's commendable that OM System are really laser focused on offering something very good for wildlife and bird photographers specifically. There's something so genius about niching down so much because the camera market is so overpopulated at the moment. If you don't find your people and serve your people, if you try to impress everyone, you're inevitably going to let people down. So I think if you are in the niche for this camera, it's just a no-brainer. There's nothing better out there at this price point. If you are not in that niche, then the question becomes a little bit more complicated. Because OM System are so laser focused on birds and wildlife, you've got your stacked sensor, so rolling shutter is a minimum. You've got the best burst modes I've ever used. You've got incredible subject detection. Everything points to these features and these sort of benefits for this specific niche of people. If you're outside of that niche, do you want better video features? Nah. Do you want stabilization on lenses that aren't super zooms? Nah. Do you want more megapixels? We're not getting that either. So it is one of these things. If you are in the niche for this camera, you are gonna love it. If you are more of a hybrid shooter and you do a little bit of bird photography and a little bit of travel and a little bit of other things as well, there may be other cameras in the conversation worth checking out. So let's answer a big question then. If you have a OM1, the original, is this a worthy upgrade for you given that it is quite pricey at the moment? Well, my answer is pretty similar to what I've just said. If you are a bird and wildlife photographer, then every single upgrade and tweak in the OM1 Mark II you will feel the benefit of. It will be a huge upgrade if you shoot that stuff all the time. If you have an OM1 because you're a landscape photographer, or you just like the small form factor, or you just like Olympus lenses, then the question becomes, will you feel the benefit as much? And the answer is probably no. And what if you are a Lumix shooter? Perhaps if you're looking from the G9 Mark II, peering over the fence, seeing how the other half live. Let me tell you my thoughts and feelings on this in my dedicated comparison video, which you should watch next. It'll be here if it's out, and if it's not, it'll be the next video that I do. So watch that next.